Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you here today. A bright, sunny, cool day after a very rainy day yesterday. So we've been discussing the Eightfold Path, a fundamental teaching of the Buddha. And last week we talked about right speech. And the next element of the Eightfold Path, which not really a path so much as a collection of things to keep in mind, things to work with, things to practice with. The next element is right action. So what according to the early Buddhist teachings, what is right action? Well, we'll look at the definition. In this sutta, right action is defined in this way. And what is right action? Abstaining from taking life, abstaining from stealing, abstaining from unchastity. That is called right action. So, not killing, not stealing, and not engaging in sexual misconduct. So one thing you notice right away is that in talking about right action, according to this basic definition, it involves not doing things. It involves prohibitions against killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. So in what spirit are we to interpret this? Well, in Buddhism, these are not considered commandments from above. The Buddha is not commanding that we abstain from these things. These are considered advice. Advice from the Buddha in furtherance of his main mission, which is to relieve or minimize human suffering. So these prohibitions come with that sort of spirit. And prohibitions usually arise because someone tries something or does something and it has an unfortunate consequence. For instance, these signs that you'll see various places with prohibitions. As a courtesy to our doctors and patients, please refrain from cell phone use beyond this point. Thank you. Well, this sign was crafted, I'm sure, because cell phone use became a problem that caused distress for people. And the prohibition was designed to minimize, relieve this distress. Another example, this rather elegant little sign that advises you not to hang your coat on the fire safety sprinkler head, because very likely these little signs were designed after some unfortunate consequences. That the sprinkler head is not tailored to be a coat hanger, and bad things happen when you use it that way. Another sign, please keep your feet off the walls. This was in a small alcove-like room where people were waiting to have their blood drawn. And apparently this was a problem. It probably caused marks on the walls. So someone crafted this little sign. And a final example, no hoverboards. This was at the entrance to United Provisions shortly after hoverboards became popular. And apparently people were using hoverboards going up and down the aisles and led to undesirable consequences. So they crafted this little sign with an underlined no for emphasis, no hoverboards under any circumstances. So the Buddha crafted these 3 items, emphasized them, because he had observed unfortunate consequences following all of them, virtually without exception. Killing leading to unfortunate consequences. Stealing, likewise, and sexual misconduct also. And these really shouldn't be too surprising. It's really part of our conventional morality in almost all cultures. And it's incorporated in really all of the major religious traditions. So it's in a way nothing new. There are some subtleties about it. One is that when the Buddha is talking about not doing things, he's referring to intentional action, not just accidents. Because someone may kill another being by accident or actually commit theft by accident, thinking, oh, I thought that was mine, I'm sorry. Or even commit what may be perceived as sexual misconduct by accident, thinking that they were not doing that, possibly. So he's talking about intentional action. And also when he refers to not killing, he's not just confining this to human beings. He's talking about sentient beings, which is usually interpreted to include animals and insects, but not plants. One could, I guess, debate where to draw the line there, but he's talking about beings that have consciousness. As we learn more and more about plants, it gets questionable as the line gets blurred, actually. So intentional action that leads to killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Now, in conventional morality, there are some built-in exceptions, and these have been incorporated into some religious traditions, like the concept of just war, for instance, as a situation where intentional killing is justified. and acceptable. The Buddha really didn't make that exception. There is one traditional Buddhist tale that is sometimes brought up to indicate that there are exceptional cases where intentional killing is appropriate. We can get into that in discussion if you want. But the vast amount of Buddhist literature would proscribe any killing whatsoever. And even certainly animals and even insects. Now, we unintentionally kill insects all the time. You can't hardly move without killing an insect somewhere if you're outside. But again, we're talking about intentional acts. So, what about, okay, it's okay to define right or skillful or wholesome or action as these three prohibitions. But in the world, we can't just not do things, we have to do things. So how can we think about this more positively? One Buddhist concept that arose somewhat, well, actually it's incorporated in the early teachings, but it's expanded upon in the Mahayana teachings with the archetype of the Bodhisattva, who acts for the benefit of all beings. And in Ehe Dogen's writing of entitled The Four Methods of Guidance for the Bodhisattva, one of them is called beneficial action, which really includes these prohibitions, but expands upon them and enlarges, and is stated in a positive rather than a negative form. Dogen says, beneficial action is skillfully to benefit all classes of sentient beings. That is, to care about their distant and near future, and to help them by using skillful means. Foolish people think that if they help others first, their own benefit will be lost. But this is not so. Beneficial action is an act of oneness, benefiting self and others together. Thus, you should benefit friend and enemy equally. You should benefit self and others alike. If you have this mind, even beneficial action for the sake of grasses, trees, wind, and water is spontaneous and unremitting. This being so, make a wholehearted effort to help the ignorant. That final statement seems a little bit out of place, and you wonder, well, where did that come from? There is a quote from the Buddha in the early Buddhist teachings: do not despise those who have yet to learn. And I place it in that category. And of course, those who are yet to learn includes all of us, because we all have learning to do. We all have blind spots. So Dogen is not talking about just allowing beings to live, to not take away their life, but when there's the opportunity to do what you can for their benefit. But one thing that comes up rather quickly, if one uses this as a guide, is that you don't always know what's going to be beneficial. You don't always know the consequence of one's actions. I mean, in many cases, you can anticipate that if you smile at someone, it'll cheer them up a little bit. Or if they drop a package and you pick it up and hand it to them, they'll be appreciative and there will be benefit in that interaction, but not always. You just never know for sure. But it's the intention that matters. And the Buddha counsels us in trying to evaluate what's beneficial and what's not, is to look at the consequences, to think about the consequences before we do something, to think about it as we're doing something, and to be aware of it after we do something, so that we can learn and be more effective in the future. So human history is just full of examples of things that were thought to be beneficial that have unfortunate consequences. For instance, the fertilizer industry. The fertilizer industry, as I understand it, started with the importation of guano, or bird feces, from Peru to the United Kingdom and to the United States to fertilize crops, because the croplands were becoming depleted from continual use. The plants taking up the nutrients every year and not having them replaced. And discovering that native people had used guano as a fertilizer, they started importing it. Of course, quickly reduced the supply of guano from its sources until it was no longer profitable to import it, and then went on to other forms of fertilizer. But the fertilizer placed on the soil over time washed off into waterways, into rivers and lakes. And now we have the problem of too much nitrogen in lakes and rivers, which leads to overgrowth of algae, and to the point that the algae consumes so much oxygen that it kills off the fish. So the intention to replenish the soil, to allow plants to grow more bountifully, and to feed more people has led to some unintended and undesirable consequences. Of course, there are many, many examples such as this. So, right action initially may seem kind of elementary, not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct. But it's not always easy to discern what is right action. And the concepts can be also used in an expanded way. Not killing, not taking life, but how about just killing someone's enthusiasm with a disparaging or sarcastic remark at times? Or other kinds of harming. And not engaging in sexual misconduct doesn't have to mean just rape. It can mean also just making people feel uncomfortable or unsafe in their gender or sexuality. And not stealing can be more broadly understood. Human history has a catalog of colonial events that have involved essentially stealing. And in one way or another, we are recipients of that booty. So right action is a guide for us. And if we're interpreting it as something that's sort of easy, then we probably need to look deeper. So I think I'll stop there. And I guess a couple questions come up. One is, if we were going to just frame right action in one sentence, what would it be? What sign would we put on the wall? And how can we put the idea or the concept of right action into practice? And what makes it difficult? Maybe you can think of examples. So we'll stop there with and break into groups, and then we'll reconvene in a few moments to discuss further and bring up anything else that anyone cares to talk about. Thank you for listening today.